Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special presentation that I'm actually very excited to be doing on grief and loss in athletes, and specifically for athletes. So this is kind of meant to be more of an introduction video, nothing in depth, which will hopefully come in the future. And I think it was a topic that was brought up, and we don't spend much time talking too much about grief and loss in athletes. So welcome to the video once again, and I look forward to talking to you more about this topic. A couple quick things that we're going to do before we dive in is I'm going to do a quick land acknowledgement. In the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute tribes, and all the original indigenous peoples of the land on which I stand. I also want to take a moment to honor my ancestors, especially around this topic of death and loss. I want to make sure that there's time and space because there's pieces to this that tie back in. And so I'll kind of explain a little bit more. I was going to talk for a brief moment, but I'll explain as we go because I think it might make more sense. So to those who came before me, who contributed to who I am today, both two-legged and four-legged. So there's definitely some significant losses in my life of two and four-legged creatures that have made me who I am, and I want to give honor to them. So with that said, there's so much, as I mentioned earlier too, there's so much information that we will not have time to cover it all. It is just impossible. So if there's something that really sparks your interest, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. You're more than welcome to dive into a topic that is of interest to you. So I will be talking a lot based on death loss, but I also will be bringing up additional kinds of losses too. So with that said, things translate, and I'll try to translate some of that for you as we go. I am not perfect. I fully acknowledge that. I'm just passionate about this topic because death and loss have also shaped who I am as a clinician, who I am as a person in life, and I just have something very special, tied into this. So, and I'm a big believer in collective wisdom. So what I mean by that is that, again, I don't claim to be an expert. If I represent, I mean to be passionate. There's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of pieces that even you will bring as someone who's watching this presentation. So collective wisdom. And I'm also going to give you this up front as well. Please take care of yourself. If something is triggering for you, if something is not feeling good, stop this video. Like, it's okay. Come back to it later. It's not a problem. Give yourself time and space and permission, most importantly, to take care of you. Also, if you're feeling particularly triggered, please make sure to reach out to 988, which is the new number for the crisis line, and also if they can help with mental health resources. Or if it's an emergency, please go to your nearest emergency room and call 911. That is also an option as well. So quick agenda for today. I think these are always worth doing. So we're going to set the stage. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about definitions, common misconceptions, means of mourning, and means of grief. Need this in order to transition to the next two pieces. So bear with me. I think it's worth hanging out for. And then we're going to talk about where can losses emerge, context of losses and emotions. And this is where I'll do kind of overall big scheme and bring it down to what might be unique to an athlete. And then I'm going to preparing to play and train again. We're going to look at the needs of mourning, which we'll discuss in the first section, and then kind of tie it into what does this all mean for you as an athlete. And of course, some references, so I'm not making all this up. So setting the stage. Again, this is our prep. This is us getting ready. This is us coming on to the same understanding. So grief. So grief is anything someone thinks or feels on the inside about a death or a loss. So this is your emotions, your physical symptoms, your thoughts, and sometimes even unexpected behaviors. Kids are really great examples of physical symptoms, right? So when they're upset, sometimes they'll say, my tummy hurts, or my head hurts, or something like that. So they're a good example of that. And unexpected behavior sometimes is like, wait, I don't normally miss the bus, or I don't normally miss getting the mail, right? These things do happen. We need to give them time and space because they're part of the grief process. So sometimes there is a belief, and this isn't always the case, that grief is just about sadness. People are just sad. Well, yes, sadness is a piece of it, but it can be a combination of feelings and emotions. So it could be shock, anxiety, confusion, anger, regret, sadness, happiness, relief, right? There's this whole spectrum of emotions that can go along with grief, all tied into the type of relationship you have with the loss and many other factors, right? It's not so simple and direct. And then with this mixture or these feelings or these thoughts, right, you may be feeling it 1 minute and that can change in the next minute, or it can change from day to day. That's okay. Right? That's just what grief is. It's not something that stays like the same in a box. I don't want to say it's pervasive because that's not the right word. It has fluidity. That's the word. It has fluidity too. So the other thing I thought was neat is that nature experiences grief and loss too. So there's a study here about, I believe it's a whale. There's multiple studies. I just chose one who mourned her baby, who was mourning her baby. But please know that humans aren't the only ones who experience grief and loss. Another story just from anecdotally I can tell you from actually personally in my life is we came across 2 ducks, and one of the ducks had sadly been hit, and the other duck was not leaving its side. You could see that it was kind of in distress and missing its partner. The other thing that I want to put out there is that grief is not pathology. It's not an illness. It's not something that's wrong with you. So for those of you who are, have a fascination with the DSM, right? There is a new diagnosis around grief disorder, or a different kind of grief disorder. We're not going to get into that. That's a whole other topic. But for now, no, grief is not a pathology. The other keyword, one of the other keywords in foundation to understand is mourning. Mourning is different than grief. Oftentimes these words get conflated and interlaced and sometimes confused. So with mourning, this is the expression of grief. This is what you move outside of you. So mourning is grief inside out. Mourning is showing and doing, aka grief gone public, right? So this would be when you're crying with somebody, you're talking to a friend, you're journaling, creating a memory box, dancing, making art, right? You're moving it outside of you. For example, I danced at my grandmother's funeral. It's personalized to you. There is no prescriptive way for grief. There's no prescriptive way for mourning, right? It is personalized to you. So we often naturally grieve a loss, right? We actually feel that loss, however we feel it. Though it's also essential to mourn because that is how someone moves forward in hope and healing. Right? So it's that expression, that movement, right? You'll hear me say movement, right? Dance therapist. So I'll come back to it. That allows us, that expression that allows us to move. So whether you're supporting somebody or whether you're looking at grief for yourself, people need time, space, and permission to both grieve and mourn. Right? And sometimes they don't always get that, and depending on the culture that you're living in or how you were raised or family systems. So the other term I want to define is bereavement. So we hear the term we use like bereavement leave, for example. So to be bereaved is to be torn apart and to have special needs. So remember that, because that kind of ties into the needs of mourning. And because we do have special needs when we are in grief and loss. We can't function the way we normally would, and nor should we be expected to. So there may be feelings of being torn to pieces or feelings of a hole in someone's life. Right? I can personally attest to feeling like torn to pieces. Like, oh my gosh, like could I put myself back together? Kind of crossed my mind. And people do have special needs, right? Things are different and their needs have shifted. That's just it. People, and I'll come back to this later, but people think that, oh, I just need to get through it and I can get back to life as normal. Not quite the case, and we'll find out why. And the other thing I want to keep in mind too is bereavement varies across cultures and ethnicities. It does not look the same. So making assumptions about grief and like what looks the same for somebody else here, it's not necessarily the case for somebody else over here. So keep those pieces in mind. So additional terms and definitions, I'm not going to define these. I'm going to encourage you. If something doesn't interest you, you want to learn more. Ambiguous loss, non-finite loss, chronic sorrow, disenfranchised grief, mass grief, collective grief, and cumulative grief. These are some terms I would encourage you to look into. I'll give you some of them. I'll give you some quick definitions of. So cumulative is exactly as it sounds, right? Loss after loss after loss after loss. Collective, COVID-19 is a great example, a collective loss, something we all feel. Disenfranchised is grief that has been, just as it says, disenfranchised, right? Tends to happen with a stigmatized loss, where it is maybe someone's lost their baby from miscarriage or suicide. So there's different places where that shows up. Ambiguous loss is when it's not clearly defined, maybe as culture or society would define it. So again, please take time to explore those, reach out with questions of those. I think those are also very great things to dive into. So common misconceptions. So we're going to go through these because these are some common ones. They're not all of them, so there are more. So grief and mourning come in predictable, orderly stages, right? I mean, if you had to feel into that, what does your mind tell you? What does your heart tell you? Chances are you've heard about the stages of grief, right? Whether it's been in school, whether it's been kind of anecdotally. So in 1969, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, published her landmark text on death and dying. Great book, absolutely great work on her part. She did her work based on seeing terminally ill patients experience in the face of their own impending deaths. So it's in a very specific scenario. She found denial, anger, bargaining, depression are things that arose. Depression and acceptance. I forgot my acceptance. What happened over time, though, is that somehow it got turned into a stage model. She never meant it to be a stage model, and nor is grief a stage model. We do not go through orderly, predictive stages, which is the reality, right? It's not orderly, and it tends to be messy. Experiences more than one feeling at a time, right? We don't experience denial and then jump to anger and then bargaining and then it's not like that. Kind of ebb and flow and interweave. And then they return to the same feeling. And there are many more feelings and emotions in grief than just those listed. So another common misconception is you try to get over grief as quickly as possible. Okay, right? I hear that kind of perpetually, that at least where I'm located in the dominant culture, that's kind of the message that's put forth. So again, many Western cultures hold this belief that unhappiness is a bad thing. That suffering should be avoided. If you encounter it, get behind you, stupid. Okay. And then for comparison, the Four Noble Truths is a different perspective. So again, we're kind of looking at cultural overlays here. So if you look at the Four Noble Truths, I bet you kind of see some of those differences. So then what truly is the reality? Grief is not something that we get over. We reconcile it, we integrate it into our lives in a new way. It's not something I was, okay, I'm done grieving. No, we just find a different way to weave it into our lives. Grief is normal and necessary. Again, remember I said not a pathology, not something wrong, normal and necessary. Again, look at nature again, come back to that. And there's a reason and purpose for grief. Grief allows us to find healing at the other side. And many times I've heard people say, oh, it'd be easier just kind of go around grief, right? Well, the only way through grief is to journey through it. If you try to circumvent it and get around it, it will come back. Another common misconception. Grief is highly personal and nobody else can help you with it. Okay, well, grief is highly personal. Grief is highly personal. That is true. And it is unique to you because of your experiences, your perceptions, everything that goes into making you or that person if you're supporting somebody. The piece that is false is that nobody else can help you with it. You need other people to support you in grief. You can't do this alone. But support can look so many different ways. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a friend. It can be a kind word. It is unique and individual to you what that support looks like. So while you do experience those highly personal thoughts and feelings, you also need to express them. You need these thoughts and feelings of trusted people in your life. And so again, you define what trust looks like for you, or if someone trusts you, kind of that if you're supporting, and use that piece and that piece in your journey, and we'll see how that comes back in one of those need of mourning. So rule of thirds. So there is no evidence to support this. I have found no research study. If there is, please let me know if you've come across it. So rule of thirds is that about a third of the people in your life will be, or in someone's life, will be supportive. That's your trusted third. Then there's the third that's neutral, doesn't help or hurt. And then there's the third that can potentially be harmful. You or whoever you're supporting, you want to find that third, that supportive third for this journey. Another common misconception is when someone dies, the mourner only grieves and mourns for the physical loss of the person. No. Right? Yes, that's a piece of it, but the key word there is only. So yes, there is that physical loss, but there's more to that, right? Here's just a few examples of what other things. Loss of identity, right? So for example, when I lost my grandmother, or actually all my grandparents, since they've all since died, am I still a granddaughter? Question came up. You can potentially lose some self-confidence around that too, because if someone was your supporter, or if, for example, if we're talking about job loss or something like that, that job may help you boost your self-confidence. Loss of security, right? Emotional, physical, fiscal, lifestyle. Especially if you're talking about a job, right? Loss of income. If you're an athlete and you can't, and you're professional and you're paid for that, and you all of a sudden you're injured or something happens, and it can be kind of scary. Loss of that security. The loss of meaning, goals and dreams, faith, will to and desire to live, joy. So those intangible things. So another misconception worth mentioning: when grief and mourning are finally reconciled, they never come up again. Yeah, right. Whew, done. Check. No, unfortunately, not the case. Many hope that there is a discrete endpoint in a grief journey. Right? And I can see why, wishing that there is an end, that you won't have to go through with things again. The reality is grief bursts will happen. It's part of it. Some of the losses in my life have happened way in the past, but something can trigger them and I'll have a grief burst. Same thing can happen to many people. And when the clients I've worked with and people I've worked with, sometimes describe kind of as a wave, as waves, especially in the initial. I'm kind of in the latter parts, right? So like, okay, a grief burst will happen, that's a wave, and things melt, right? It's part of the journey. And it's kind of a beautiful part because it allows you to bring some more reconciliation, some more understanding. As mentioned earlier, these are just some misconceptions. I really encourage you to learn more about these and others if this is a topic of interest to you, to kind of work through some of those potential biases or things that you've heard in the past. So, diving right on in ahead, we're going to look at the 6 needs of mourning. So this is one model. This was put forth by Ellen Wolf. There's a couple other, and they're all pretty darn similar, with minor, in my opinion, I guess I should say, minor differences. So the first need of mourning is that you're acknowledging, or you're helping someone acknowledge the reality of the death or the loss, if it's not a death loss. Gently confronting the reality. That can sometimes be hard, and sometimes denial and other things come up as a protective piece. Right? Sometimes it's okay to live in denial for a little bit, especially if it's a traumatic loss. To protect the psyche, you need to protect itself for a little bit. Then maybe people may need to dose themselves on any, or actually this need or any of the needs. You can dose yourself, you can come back and through them. There is no linear progression. And then kind of weave in and out of through. You spend maybe time on 2 at a time or 1 at a time. There is no, again, linear model, right? You work as you do it. So embracing the pain of the loss. So we're going to come back to the 5 domains in another slide and kind of talk a little bit more of that. But right, there's pain, there's psychological pain, there's physical pain potentially. But there is pain, and to acknowledge that pain instead of pushing it away. Remembering the person who died. So this is working towards a relationship of memory rather than one of presence. So remembering and holding the person who died, or remembering holding that experience, whatever it might be within you, versus having that kind of physical, tangible, or that direct interaction. Working on developing a new sense of identity. So part of one's self-identity or self-perception comes from relationships. So I alluded to this earlier, it's loss of a mirror. If my parents were to die, would I still be a daughter? We see ourselves in other people. They provide some of that structure. Search for meaning, renewing one's resources for life and living after having been torn apart. So after one of my grandparents died, this is an example I use a lot, is he died of Alzheimer's. It impacted me so much. I remember thinking, I don't want another granddaughter to experience this. So that's how I became involved in the Alzheimer's Association. I went on to lead support groups, but what got me started was the All-Stars program. From also I said, I'm never doing triathlon, it's too hard, it's too scary. I ended up signing for my first triathlon, doing a sprint. And to this day, I'm still doing a lot of my stuff in memory of my grandmother, as well as raising funds for the Alzheimer's Association. But that's how I found meaning in life. In one way, I guess I should say. I found a couple more, but that's one example. And then we talked about support, right? So here it is again, receiving ongoing support. So generally, like if we're talking about death loss, I use that as an example. We're looking at maybe a year of like people are kind of really around supporting you, but, and then kind of tend to fade off. But really, it's even when you get past that, I think if I remember correctly, it's about year 2 to 3 where people really still need that support. And then even past that again, it's continually needing that support after the loss. So here it is again, the domains of grief comments that come back to it. So we've got the cognitive. So cognitive discomfort, where thought process may be confused and memory can be impaired. So I used the example, or like, oh, usually I remember to pick up the newspaper, right? Your thought processes are, yeah, there's actually some good work from a researcher out of the University of Arizona who's looking at the neuroscience behind this. Fascinating stuff. So spiritual, right? This is the spiritual discomfort. And this is not necessarily religion. This is the spiritual, like why go on living? Will life have meaning? Where is God in this? Or where is nature in this? All of these things, these questions, these why questions. Physical. Natural results in physical discomfort as the body responds to the stress, because we have a whole stress system built into our body. And again, I gave examples of kids, but for us too, like so psycho retardation, like moving slowly, like our body responds to things like this. Emotional, right? Emotional discomfort, the multitude of wave-like emotions. I gave that example earlier. We're going to feel all those things potentially: anger, sadness, happiness, whatever it might be, but we're going to feel something. All right, social. So natural results in social discomfort. As friends or family withdraw, and isolation can be the result. So this especially I see happen with stigmatized losses like suicide, for example. And just in general, death and loss and things like this tend to make people feel uncomfortable. They don't know how to be with it. And so they kind of just withdraw a little bit, right? And that can be hard when you're experiencing loss, when you potentially need to reach out to somebody. So that's kind of this interesting dynamic that happens. All right. On the same foundation, we got the vocabulary down, broken some misconceptions. Let's talk about planning and training, right? We're going to look at, again, this big overall first, and then I'm going to narrow it down. Right? We live life as athletes in the bigger scheme of things. Okay. So, right, we talked about death as an example, job loss, time loss. Like, I wish I would have spent more time doing it. Aging, life transition. And that's a big one. Think about during the pandemic, for example, people like at high school who lost the opportunity to do graduations or prom, or people whose weddings, all these different things, these life transitions, illness, moving, immigration, incarceration. And incarceration can be a loss for the person who's incarcerated, but for the family too. There's multiple ways to look at that one. Loss of culture. Transitions, just transitions in general, not necessarily life transitions. It's a little different. Loss of safety. What could have been. This is one, like what could have been if I had done X, Y, and Z. Loss of traditional ceremonies. And then trauma and PTSD, and inherited forms of trauma and grief. So this is kind of the work of Joy DeGruy. This is Resna. This is a lot of it. And there's also some those are examples I gave our psychology, but there's also some biology to support how genetics and how the supporting structures for our DNA are altered, right, through trauma and PTSD. So Dr. Wolfelt, who I referenced before, he's done some work on reframing PTSD as a form of grief too. So with all that said, right, there's a big context of where loss can emerge. And loss isn't necessarily isolated to just one part of our life, right? I can't just block it off and say, okay, as a personal, I'm going to be okay, I'm going to experience the loss. Well, no, I'm also a student and a mother. I can't turn those pieces off. It's going to infiltrate and be part of that. All right, sport specific, as promised, right? Injury is a great one. There's lots of research as an example, not a great one, but as an example, injury. Lots of research about how injury can evoke a sense of grief too. For many, like whether it's career ending, season ending, like mine, right? The loss that can potentially go along with that. Again, specific transitions, right? The transitions between, if you're in high school, like GV to varsity, like I didn't make that transition, or how transitioning between schools means you lose potential touch with your team and you're doing a new team. Not reaching a specific goal that you maybe set for yourself, or missing a game or a race. Maybe if it is due to injury, but what if something else happened? Family came into town, right? Something else. Not making the team or ambassadorship. That can sting. Missing an opportunity. Like I should have taken that opportunity to go to that sports camp or something along those lines. Retirement, whether it's retirement as a professional athlete or you're retiring from the sport. Loss of a teammate or a staff member. So this isn't necessarily death, but it could be someone retires, somebody leaves, someone transitions out. Contract sponsorships or agreements if you're a professional athlete, right? There's some losses if things like that don't come through again. And then choices and sacrifice. Right? I think this is such an interesting one that's definitely worth exploring. Is as an athlete, I think professional, recreational, no matter what, making choices and sacrifices for your sport. When you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So maybe you're saying yes to practice and you're missing a family member's birthday. That's a loss too. So those choices and those sacrifices potentially bring up loss. Okay, so coming back out into some of these contexts. So we talked about where some of these losses occur in general, in sport specific, and now I want to bring some context to this. So these losses happen in the context of isms, systems, and culture. So racism, sexism, genderism, the list continues on. And that can bring some pieces and some strain and some loss and some more hurt, right? Systems, the school and medical, mental health systems, right? Those can not make, they can add to the loss, or they can perpetuate it too, right? So potentially if you're in school and someone says, you're grieving a loss, and the school was like, we don't care, that doesn't help the situation. Not all schools are like that. That's not my implication. My point being is that if someone doesn't understand grief, chances are they might accidentally perpetuate it too, right? And then we look at dominant culture and friend-zone culture. What messages do we get about loss from both sides? And then social structures. Think about the structures of teams. Think about the of athletic teams. Think about the structures of just in general. Like, we have different social structures in terms of finances as well. All these different social structures that play a piece in this. So there's more to say about this, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. If this is a topic that interests you, let me know. So necropolitics is one I want to bring in here too. So this is a unique one. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But this is interesting because this is bestowing upon somebody the role of the living dead while alive. And so this is the work, the citations are down there. And that's an interesting one, right? They specifically done within the context of race relations. Think about that and how that might impact your psyche. Preparing to play and train again. All right, so we just went through all this information. What do we do with it? So here we come to, again, searching for meaning and receiving ongoing support. Just quick definitions and reminders of what those are. So I gave you an example of what my searching and meaning for is. And I gave you an example of that because it may be interesting for you to think about how you find meaning after a loss. How do you find meaning in that? What do you do? Even if it's as simple as after if you lose a game, how do you find meaning in that? How do you mourn that? How do you work through some of that? Do you do it naturally? Do you have a ritual? Do you have any, what does that look like? And then seeking out support. This is an interesting one for me because there is such a need for this and it seems to be lacking. Not everywhere, I'm not generalizing, just seem to be lacking, because that piece is so crucial to find support. And again, support doesn't have to look one way. It can look different ways for different people. Whether it is family, whether it is friends, whether it is teammates, whether it's a coach, whether it's an athletic trainer, but finding those people for support and asking for it. And especially if there's a stigma like mental health support, challenging that's not always easy. So there's no promise of easy in any of this. There's this process that we all go through of finding and integrating grief into our lives. Okay. So what does this all mean? So this is where things to think about beyond what I just said. So whether you're an athlete, your support staff, or if you're a community member, doesn't matter, right? So honor the grief and mourning journey. Honor it for yourself, honor it for somebody else. Be aware of it, right? Advocate for or offer support, time, and space. Be maybe that supportive third, or advocate for that within the system that you work in, whether it's a school, whether it's a professional team, doesn't matter. A recreational athlete, does not matter. Advocate for that. Make that something that's knowable, tangible, and doable. Educate yourself and others. So this is the first step. You can have others watch this video. You can have others do more research into it. You can have yourself do more research into it. But the point is, right, understanding grief gives it more space for you to be able to engage with it, right? If you don't talk about it, don't learn about it, you can't do anything. You can't do anything with it. So give it that space. And then we also need to look at culture change at large and in sport. So that there's a culture change instead of, like, for example, at work where you get 3-day bereavement leave. Okay, that's not enough, right? But my point is that it takes all of us to make this change, right? To change this culture. So I'm going to share one study with you. Can't help myself, but it reinforces what I just said. So this specific study, they surveyed 40 members from athletic teams, coaches, staff, athletes, various levels. So it's not just professional, not just school, right? Leads to determine what happens in the aftermath of a team member's death. So again, context is specific, but great learning to have. So the findings of the survey indicate that many of the respondents experienced acute grief responses, so that's acute meaning right after, that affect performance. So if nothing else, if someone doesn't go for the mental health side of it and the importance for somebody, that might be a swayer, right? Because people want to perform, especially if the performance is affected. That can sometimes get people's buy-in. But anyway, which memorialization and community support was helpful, whereas the news media was often not, right? So there's some things here. So memorialization, community support. There was finding ritual. Basically, what that is ritual. Finding some way to remember that person and finding that community support. And then what the authors conclude, and again supports what I was just saying, is appropriate resources, and if for a school, if they're working in a school bereavement policy specific to students and athletes. They also suggest addressing bereavement needs for athletes just in general, and their coaches was basically paramount to mitigating some of these complications associated. So if your coach or someone directly supports that, you have the power to help be that support third. Or if you're a teammate, you can be that support third. Even if you're kind of a recreational triathlete team, right? You are not seeing each other every day. You can make a point. And you know that someone's lost something or in their life, to say, hey, can I cook a meal for you? Can I do something, right? It doesn't have to be anything super big, but to reach out and say, hey, I'm here for you. It's important. All right, so references, as promised. Feel free, do reach out with questions, information. I do have lots of social media opportunities for you as well. And I will leave you here with this piece. I don't think I have anything else. I think, yeah, that is the end. But I'll leave you with the contact information, and thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have found it helpful. I can tell the topic I'm really passionate about, because we all go through grief, and to give time and space for it is meaningful. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in another video. Take care.